All right, we've already got some good questions, but please keep on asking them. You can ask your questions using the Q&A function, and we'll answer them live. And we're going to start off with a pretty subjective question that might be tricky to answer. What is the best neighborhood to live as a student in Iowa City? How do you know if you will live with other students or on your own or with a landlady?
That's an excellent question. I might have, there's a lot of parts to that question, so I might have to have you repeat some of it. Really, as far as best neighborhoods, Iowa City and Iowa are generally safe places. And so we don't have any major concerns that way. There are pros and cons to living. Let's start with downtown. So downtown is where you're going to find a lot of your academic buildings for your classes. It's where you're going to find the most restaurants, stores. But at the same time, it can be very expensive to live downtown or more expensive to live downtown. It can also sometimes be noisy if you are living above a business. So we do caution you there. The farther out you go from downtown Iowa City, you're likely to get kind of a better apartment for a more affordable price. So personally, I live in Coralville, Iowa, which is about 5 minutes away. And it's quieter. It's quieter, it's more cost effective, but you do have to consider, if I was a student, I would have to likely take the bus, ride a bike, take a car. So we do have a pretty good bus system, considering the size of our town. A lot of people bike or purchase mopeds. So there are good things about living. There's pros and cons that really are just what's best for you. As far as roommates, most apartments, you get to pick your roommates because you all sign the same written document. Those are your roommates. That being said, there are some places in town that offer single rooms, but you share them with people that you may not necessarily know. For example, there is a property company called Hawks Ridge, and that's how they do their leases. I also believe that there's a place called the Quarters that does something very similar. As far as living with your landlord, that's rare. But sometimes that would come up in a situation where it's a house, but the bedrooms are all separate, but you share common areas, like a kitchen, for example. For the most part, the landlords do not live in the apartments. There are a few exceptions to the rule. That's a question that you would want to ask the property manager.
You didn't even need me to remind you the
Awesome.
other parts. You got it all. Okay, so our next question is from somebody who is a graduate student, and they just want to confirm, as a graduate student, their only option is off-campus living.
Do you want me to address that? Okay. As a graduate student, yes, that's correct, because the university offers on-campus living only to undergraduate students. So the graduate students are typically required, if they want to, like Amanda mentioned, if they want to live either in Iowa City or in the area around Iowa City, they will have to definitely look for off-campus housing. There are no options for grad students to live on campus. So that's what we can say.
Okay, our next question is, what role should a student play, a PhD student, in securing their housing and or room?
That's up to the student. The university does provide an off-campus housing website. which is a way to connect students to property managers. The university doesn't set that up or doesn't assign you housing. The off-campus housing website is just a place that landlords and tenants can reach out to each other, but the university does not play a role in that.
And I think that that website is awesome, and I am going to share that website in the chat right now. It's offcampushousing.uiowa.edu. So you should be able to find that in the chat right now.
And speaking to you is...
I was supposed to be anonymous.
Yeah, well, you can
I'm
introduce
Michael Borcheller. I'm behind the scenes just doing the question and answers here. Our next question is from a transfer student. And at their current university, they have apartments that are just for graduate students. Does Iowa have this option?
There is one option. It's called Aspire at West Campus. It is just for graduate students at this time. It is a little far, it's not downtown. It's actually on the border of Iowa City and Coralville, but the bus system does go out there. It's a fairly new building. One of the big perks of Aspire is that it has a dog park and allows pets. It's not very common that pets would be allowed in an apartment in Iowa City. It has to be approved by a landlord. And so that is nice. There are certainly some areas that tend to have more grad students, certain areas of Coralville, also certain areas near on the west side of campus, which is where the law school, the medical school, the dental school are. So there are certainly areas where grad students tend to live, but they're not strictly for graduate students. For example, I went to law school at the University of Iowa. I lived on the west side of campus, and my building was almost all graduate and professional students.
Fantastic. Okay, we have a really good question here, and it's complicated, so I'm going to ask it in parts. This student he's tried to arrange a lease, but the landlord wants a reference, and he wants to know who he can use since he's not in the U.S. and doesn't know anyone in the U.S. to provide a reference.
Right. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone in the United States. It could be someone, if you've ever lived with someone before, like a roommate, that would probably be a good option. If you've ever had a job and someone who could talk about kind of your level of responsibility, whether, someone who is going to say, are you, basically, if you, they want to know if you're neat, if you pay your bills on time. It's typically not a family member, but if you don't have any other options, I would suggest a family member, and explain to the landlord that you are an international student, and so that this might be an additional challenge.
And the second part of the question is that the application, the lease, says that it requires a social security number, but the student, of course, doesn't have one.
Right. And so I have seen that in the past. It's a question to ask the landlord because they could certainly waive that. And sometimes what I've seen, if you don't have a if you don't have a social security number, what they would do is charge basically an additional security deposit, which is money that you would be able to get back at the end of the lease. So there are ways a landlord can certainly waive that requirement. If they don't, you should move, there are still plenty of apartments in Iowa City, but I do know that a landlord cannot say we don't rent to international students. That's not allowed.
Right. This person plans to arrive in Iowa City a little bit before their lease begins. They want to know how they can manage for those few days before their lease actually begins?
Yeah, so a couple of options. One, you could possibly see if your landlord would let you move in early. They would charge you an additional fee, but if they may be willing to do that, especially if there's no one currently, if the other person has already moved out. I would suggest. A hotel could be expensive, but that would be an option. There's also a website that I haven't personally used, but it's called Airbnb, and that is basically people in the community who are willing to let you stay at their house for a couple of days for a fee. So it's airbnb.com. So I think that would be another option, especially if, as far as the hotels go, if you are in touch with other international students who may be in a similar situation, that would help with costs.
We had another question. They want us to write down the name for the university apartments for graduate students. And before I send that in the chat, I just wanted to confirm it is Aspire at West Campus.
Yeah, Aspire, I think you'll find it.
And so I have shared that in the chat just now. The next question is, what's the best way to search for potential roommates to share an apartment with?
Good question. Actually, on that off-campus housing website, I believe there's also a way there's a roommate tab that you can look at. Also, some landlords will also post that if they know of people. So that would probably require if you see an apartment you like or an apartment company you like. Sometimes on their individual websites, they will also have a roommate search. I also know sometimes people use social media to find roommates that way as well.
Here's a question I genuinely do not know the answer to. Is there a designated parking area for employed or doctoral students?
That is specific to the department and something you would have to discuss with your department. If there isn't, it is possible to get parking passes, but sometimes the available parking lots are not near your office building. But there is a bus system that would go from parking lots to your building. But no, generally it depends on your position. But parking can be very difficult here. It can be expensive. And that's why a lot of people choose buses, bikes, walking, etc. So that's something you have to talk to your individual department about.
And I would like to remind the participants that we still have some time, and if you have any more questions regarding today's topic, please feel free to post them still in the Q&A function of Zoom, and Amanda will be happy mostly to respond to them.
Here's another good question. If I have a teaching assistantship with my department, are they going to arrange my housing or room off campus?
No, they won't. That's not something I've heard of. You have to assume that they will not. If they haven't told you about it, the answer would be no. That would be part of some sort of agreement that would have already been agreed to. I would not. That would be very unusual. So that's going to be something that you'll need to work on.
There could be a connectivity suggestion from the department. They may connect you to other international students that they have already that are graduate students, and they may put you in touch with those students that are currently here and living here. So there could be potentially, you could ask them if they would have that kind of suggestion. But other than that, like Amanda said, please do not expect the department to directly help you with that housing.
All right. If somebody wanted to make an appointment with you at Student Legal Services, Amanda, do they need to make the appointment ahead of time, or can they just walk in?
Especially make an appointment. August is a very busy time at Student Legal Services. But we are usually able to get people in fairly quickly. We only have 2 attorneys, so it's not likely that we would do a walk-in appointment. There are quite a few ways to schedule appointments, and I can have Michael include that information. I can give you our phone number, which is 319-335-3276. You could also, I think back a slide was our website. There is a way to request an appointment that way. It literally says appointments, and then you enter your information and we will contact you to schedule an appointment. If you're at the Memorial Union, the IMU, you can stop by our office. It's G115 IMU to schedule. I don't think we probably won't be able to get you in. You could also email our office to schedule an appointment, and that is student-legal@uiowa.edu.
And all of that, the phone number, the website, and the email should appear in the chat function right now. Another question that came in asks, what happens if a roommate leaves and the landlord says you're responsible?
Oftentimes that is the case, and that's true. So what it depends on is what your lease says. So if your lease is 2 names, both you and your roommate, that means that you are agreeing to be financially responsible for the other person. If that person doesn't pay their rent or leaves, you are responsible for paying. Now, that being said, you have some options. So the best option would be to find a new roommate who is willing to move in and to pay rent. If your landlord knows of someone, they may be able to put you in contact with them to have a new roommate. If the roommate leaves, they are still responsible. So even if they're not living there, they need to pay the rent, or they need to find someone to take their place. And so that's why we often recommend that students have individual leases. So they are the only person on the lease. So there are some apartments where you live together, but you have separate written documents, meaning that yes, you share a kitchen or you share a restroom, but you're not financially responsible for the other person. And I think that's really important because that does happen.
So speaking of responsibility, on that off-campus housing website, what kind of responsibility does the university have? And is there any guarantee that there's no scams there? Somebody's asking a question about if there might be false listings or something like that.
Yeah, my understanding, my office does not control that website. My understanding is that the university does not, at this time, it's something I would like to work on, does not screen or make sure that those are not scams. So you still have to make sure that this is a real landlord, that's why you might want to check with the city housing inspector. They'll be able to provide you information about who the real landlord is. So yes, the university, which again is not my office, is really just there to host the website, and it's a space that everyone can use, but the university is not involved.
Okay, so we have a question about if you have any suggestion where to find furniture in Iowa City.
Great question. So there are probably the easiest, there are a lot of consignment stores or what we call a second-hand store to buy if you're interested in used furniture. A couple places, there's a place called Stuff that is in Coralville and Iowa City. There are some pretty decent places called Goodwill. There's a place called the Salvation Army, which has nothing to do with the military. There is a place called Crowded Closet. I think I'll have to check. This is something we might want to include on our website. I'm not sure it's there yet. I'm more familiar with the used furniture stores personally than I am with the new stores. Also whenever there's people, this is going to sound kind of strange, but whenever there is a change in apartments, sometimes people will just leave furniture by the side of the road. And these are people who that is for the taking. If it's left by the side of the road, those are people who just don't have the ability to get rid of their furniture, and they would rather just have you come get it. So I know that seems kind of strange, but that is a very common occurrence here when people move out of an apartment. I'm not saying it's a good idea, because if you leave furniture and no one comes to get it and the landlord has to get rid of it, they could charge you for it. But when you're moving in, it is a way to find furniture.
Okay, we have a bit of an unusual question, but it comes up from it certainly comes up later on in a student's career. They want to know how to do subleases. How does that work?
Yeah, so a sublease, your lease will probably have a sublease provision in it. Most of the time with a sublease, it would be a situation where you have found a person that is willing to take over your lease for you. There is usually paperwork that the landlord needs you to sign. And then usually there's a cost, and that depends on the landlord. I would expect it to be maybe a couple $100s. We also, I'm not sure if it's on our website. It might be, otherwise we have it in our office, a sublease agreement. And that's between you and the new person. But I do want to caution you that a sublease does not erase you from the lease. So if the sublease moves in but doesn't pay their rent, the landlord could still tell you that you have to pay. And so subleasing can be tricky. It's easiest if you have somebody in mind, because that you have a friend or a coworker to meet that way. So you should read your lease first, but there will likely be paperwork and a fee.
And do you have any advice if people are looking for a sublease, if they're only going to be here for a short time, for example, during the summer?
Sure. Same thing. Some landlords will have a sublease page on their website to let other people know. The other thing is you should talk to your most landlords do not allow short-term leases less than 1 year, but that's something you could certainly ask the landlord about. But they will probably ask for some money in exchange for making that change for you.
And what would happen in the very worst case scenario? What if somebody thinks that they've arranged an apartment, but they arrive in Iowa City and find out that, it was a scam? I don't know how common that is, but what would they be able to do?
It doesn't happen very often. In that situation, there's a potential financial, there are times where we've had to get the police involved because someone has been scammed. Fortunately, there is a lot of housing available. So if your initial plan doesn't work out, you should be able to find another place fairly quickly. If you do end up in a situation like that, another office that I would recommend is Student Care and Assistance. And they can help with emergency housing in those situations if you need something temporarily.
And I just want to confirm that office was called Student Care and Assistance?
Yes, it is in the IMU 135 is the room number.
I am putting that into the chat right now for anybody who wanted to get that confirmation. And we have, I think, one final question here. And this might be best for Andrea, but both of you could probably try and answer. Mm-hmm. What's the best way to connect with other students and create a social life, living on or off campus?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. There are literally 500 plus student organizations on campus. Don't quote me on this, but it's CESL, Center for Student Involvement and Leadership. If you go to their website, and I'll have Michael find that and post that, it will give you a list of the organizations on campus. And we do have a student organization fair in, I want to say, like the last week of August, where you can come and just meet all of the different groups. I strongly believe that you will find a group there for you. And I believe that there are some specific organizations that are catered to international students. So we have, for example, a Chinese student association, a Pakistani student association. We have sports clubs. We have, if you name it, we probably have it. And if we don't, we can help you and your friends start one. There's also, I think when you're at orientation, you're going to be with your new students for a couple days. That's a really good time to say, oh, if we have a break, maybe we could go get a cup of coffee, or maybe we could go have lunch. And so I do find that introducing yourself during orientation, and then attending the student organizations fair. And then if you find a student organization you're interested in, I believe the contact information for the president of the club is also on that website, or we can get that for you.
And I would like to add that that's a great reminder about the orientation and the fair, but also ISSS, a website for new students, has a lot of resources for you as new students to come in when you're coming in. And so I would like to reference that website. It's isss.uiowa.edu, and follow the link to new students. And then that opens up a new web page where you can see different sections related to different parts of your preparation to come here. But one of them is also resources, both for undergrads and graduate students. And it does list the making connections. That's one of the first links that are showing there. So I would strongly recommend to also go there before you even come to campus to look up some options for connecting with other students.
And I'm posting the ISSS website in the chat as well.
Thank you, Michael.
And
do we have any other questions?
that is all our questions for
Excellent, excellent timing. And just a few reminders. Thank you so much, Amanda, for your presentation and for answering all of the good questions that we had from the participants today. And we hope that we have addressed the off-campus housing topic for you. If you have any follow-up questions, please do not hesitate to contact us at isss@uiowa.edu, and we will be happy to follow up with you. Just a reminder that if you have any questions regarding your pre-arrival checklist or your documents, the immigration documents, please do not hesitate to contact the ISSS orientation team at the email isss-orientation@uiowa.edu. And then also I was referencing this website just a moment ago, and here it's the link, and Michael sent it to you via chat as well. So we strongly recommend that you take a look at that website as well. And then there is another reminder about the upcoming webinars. The next one is going to take place on May 31st, and it will be discussing university billing and health insurance. And there are 4 more webinars after that. So you're welcome to register and attend these webinars as well. And thank you so much again for your participation today. And please do remember to complete the survey. Michael sent you a link to the survey, so we would really appreciate your feedback on today's webinar, and we look forward to hearing from you.